Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome aboard to Great Shot Kid, your podcast discovering the works of Star Wars creators both in and outside the Star Wars galaxy. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And with us today is special guest from the Nerd Party here on the Filibuster, and also from Trek FM's Earl Grey, Lee Hutchison.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Thank you so much for joining us, Lee.
It's just Filibuster, not the Filibuster.
Yeah,
you'll
get
right.
in trouble with that. We had to do it 3 times yesterday, me and Darren. I went, the Filibuster, and he went, do it again. I went, oh, it did not come through. Filibuster. No, there you got it. It's so easy. I always say it as the Filibuster, but it's like the Filibuster with a lowercase t as opposed to a capital T.
It's sort of like Rolling Stones. Nobody's ever sure.
Yeah.
But this week we are going to be discussing Zero Dark 30, which was shot by the cinematographer for Star Wars Rogue One, Greig Fraser. And for anybody that is unfamiliar with Zero Dark 30, Mike, why don't you give a synopsis?
Zero Dark 30 is a movie about the woman who basically found Osama bin Laden and, the team that went in to kill him.
There you go. That's it in a nutshell. It's sort of a ranging epic covering a span of many years and posing a lot of interesting philosophical questions along the way as you sort of discover the tradecraft that is put into effect for modern real-world spy work and interrogations, especially in a post-9/11 world. And Lee, why don't you go ahead and give us your reaction to the film?
Yeah, it's like Zero Dark 30 was a film that I was quite excited to see, the talent involved, and I remember seeing the trailers and thinking, well, I'm totally sold on this. At the time, I remembered one of the big takeaways was like, Chris Pratt's going to be a Navy SEAL officer? Like, that's the fat guy from Parks and Recreation, well before he kind of took off as the kind of action hero he is. I remember just sitting in the cinema and I was just absolutely blown away that I love kind of procedural movies like this where it gets really into the nitty gritty, where it's all about competent people making decisions and people that are kind of not the superheroes or the big heroes, but the people that are making the day-to-day bureaucracy and following through with that. And I find things like that really appealing sometimes. I don't know if it's from kind of following from Star Trek where like that's basically the day-to-day life there. And I remembered always just that kind of scene towards the end as they have the raid, and even though everyone knows how it ends, my heart was just pounding away in my chest. It's definitely one of my favorite films of the past few years, and it's certainly up there. I mean, me and Mike recorded an episode a few weeks ago where we talked about alternative Christmas movies, and I put this down as an alternative Christmas movie, and going by the tenuous thing that they're making a list, they're checking it twice, they're going to find out if you've been naughty or nice. SEAL Team 6 are coming to town, so yeah, it'll be a movie I'll be watching this Christmas to try and continue to underline this is a Christmas movie.
That episode of Filibuster is very much worth listening to because you guys have some interesting picks, and hearing Zero Dark 30 as a Christmas movie is that's a little bit out of left field, Lee. I'm going to let you know that. That's
just a tad.
There. Yeah, just a little bit. But what about you, Mike? What was your reaction then and your reaction now?
My reaction then, I was also really looking forward to it. This was like the last film of that year, 2012, that I hadn't seen, that I felt like I needed to see before I could make like a top 10 list or anything. So, I went along with my commentary track stars off-topic co-hosts Max and Brandon to see the midnight show at the Roosevelt Theater, and it was kind of awesome. I mean, it was like one of those things where, like Lee, because of the talent involved, in particular Catherine Bigelow, I was really excited. Ever since Strange Days, I've made it a point of seeing, Catherine Bigelow's movies the day they come out, because I just know that they're the odds of them being great are pretty high. And this movie certainly did not disappoint, although I have to say that the more I watch it, the more I appreciate it. I believe this is probably only the third time that I've seen it, because it's not the type of movie where you're like, yeah, man, let's get some Mickey's and go Mickey's. Sorry, that's a Oak Park reference. Let's get some KFC and go watch Zero Dark 30, right? It's going to be awesome. But it is still just like riveting, like absolutely riveting. Yeah. And I love how it's really sort of all about, this one woman's sort of like quest to take down bin Laden, and it's all like basically like office drama, and everything, and just like this single point of view throughout like the entire movie. And Jessica Chastain is so good in this movie. I mean, she is just a total badass. And then you get to the third act, and all of a sudden, I mean, we talk about gear shift movies, and I love gear shift movies. I mean, this is a great gear shift movie in that it becomes like this sort of like procedural of like, now we're going to follow this completely new set of characters and just watch step by step as they take down bin Laden, like exactly what happens, like every step of the way. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, and I really, really do love it.
Yeah, this is one of those films where I really wish I had seen it in the theater. I saw it when it was released on video because it had gotten so much high praise. Even though, yes, I'm also a fan of Catherine Bigelow, I was, in my circle of friends, I was actually the rare bird to have fallen in love with Strange Days and purchased it on videotape and just like watch it. I was like, this movie's fantastic. What are you guys not seeing in this right now? But I was odd man out. I feel happy that I found a kindred spirit so many years down the line. And inadvertently, I've been a fan of hers since seeing Near Dark, which is possibly one of the best vampire movies ever made.
I still haven't seen Near Dark, I have to say. Strange Days, though, I mean, God, that movie is so good. Strange Days is how I mean, that's what I watched as the clock struck midnight on December 31st, 1999,
I'll prepare you, Near Dark is very much an artifact of its time. Yeah. There are limitations to it where you can tell it's low budget and it's 1980s, okay? You just roll with it, you go with it. It's got Lance Henriksen. It's got Bill Paxton.
It's got the cast of Aliens. Yeah,
basically. And it's really a lot of fun though. It's got a great spirit, and Bigelow she's a terrific director. She really is. And one of the things that struck me about watching it this time, and I guess the reason that we're discussing it now is, yes, I was caught up in it. Yes, the direction, the pacing, the editing, everything was wonderful. But because we are paying attention to it, because the cinematographer worked on Rogue One, the shots in this movie are just amazing. The way that the colors balance, the way that the camera moves, the way that the shadows play, the way that, like, everything about it. This is one of those films where, even with my somewhat limited knowledge of how everything works behind the camera, I can watch this and I can say, wow, I understand what he did to make it look like this. Like, I might not be able to tell you how to operate the camera or put the filter on the lens, but I know I can tell somebody was, a great amount of work went into this. And so far as, the Rogue One trailers, because, as we record this, it hasn't come out yet, there were certain shots where I could see hallmarks where they're standing in front of the giant video screens. And I'm like, oh gosh, that looks just like that shot from Rogue One. Like, I sort of tied together why. Now, Lee, in terms of the look of it, is there anything that jumped out to you about this? Going through it.
I remembered watching it kind of the first time on the big screen, and like obviously the last like 30 minutes is all kind of under this green filter, and you just watch and you think, oh yeah, that's something they did in post, and then you watch it again at home and you think, wow, that's just so realistic. And you kind of, like, I'm the same as you, I kind of like dig into these things. It's not one thing to watch the movie, how did this get made? And then to find out that it was something they did genuinely. They shot it on infrared, that they put I just think it's brilliant, and it sums up kind of an art in filmmaking that's been lost, and is that they took the infrared cameras that they'd used in the embassy scenes, and put them on top of the guns, and like they used what was originally just a prop, a throwaway prop, to help light and shoot the sequence. And I just think that's brilliant. And I think like for people like Greig Fraser and Catherine Bigelow, you're mentioning there kind of the vampire movie. So many directors, James Cameron is a key example. So many of these directors, your Peter Jacksons, all made their start in these kind of horror movies, these DIYs where you had to make use of everything you got, and everything couldn't just be used once. It had to have multiple purposes. And I think that's something that directors have lost. And you can see that, you can imagine the conversation between Greig Fraser and Catherine Bigelow. How are we going to do this? What about those cameras that we used on that set? And it's having that mentality where you can improvise, develop skills, and use things again and again and get your money's worth out of it, because it seems like it was a real shoot where they just went out there at times, and if they got a good shot, they would go out there and film it. And it's been able to improvise and be smart with what you've got. And I think that's incredibly well shown in the behind the scenes, techniques that look effortless on the big screen.
Now, in terms of those techniques and efforts, Mike, we were talking recently about presentation and filming formats, and in terms of basically the question is, do you think that Fraser's decision making and comfort with digital cameras is what got him the job on Rogue One, as demonstrated by what he did with Zero Dark 30?
I don't necessarily know if that's the case. I think maybe, the fact that he did this sort of like gritty, war movie, but one which was extremely glossy. I think that might have had something to do with it. I mean, this was, the movie, was it shot on film or was it shot on digital? It was shot
digital.
on digital. Yeah,
Digital.
right. Yeah, but it has that sort of like filmic look to it in a sense, which is something that I think they were definitely going for with Rogue One. Like they just had all those the press conferences and stuff last weekend, and one of the things that they kept on talking about was how they were trying to replicate, the look of a 70s movies while still taking full advantage of today's technology,
Mm-hmm.
And I really sort of like get that impression from Zero Dark 30. I mean, one of the things that really stands out to me is like the lighting and everything like that, and the image quality is like spot on. It's like pristine, and yet like the movement and the compositions and everything are like very, very gritty, almost like documentary in feel, and there's that contrast, that like beautiful imagery shot like very sort of like down and dirty, you know what I mean? I don't know. The contrast there, I think, is really, really striking, and it's one of the reasons why I think the photography in this movie is a standout. Not to mention the fact that he does definitely make a shift when it gets to that final act with the infrared cameras and everything, and also when they're not using the infrared cameras. I love that they're not afraid to just let things be dark. I mean, there's some shots in there where it's like black on black.
Yeah, the helicopter's flying out to the final hit.
Right.
Like you have to sit there and there were a couple of shots where I was like, yeah, okay, I can see everything.
Right.
But you could still see everything, but it wasn't. You didn't have that fake nighttime blue light shining on everything.
Right. It wasn't day for night or anything like that.
Right.
And it wasn't like artificially lit, with a bunch of, like extra, lights or whatever. At least it didn't look like that. And I think that's one of the things which seems striking about the Rogue One footage that we've seen, and, all the stuff, all the people who saw, parts of the movie, coming out and talking about it. It's like, they keep on talking about how it feels like a war movie, how it doesn't look like any other Star Wars movies, and yet it feels like a Star Wars movie in some ways. And I think that's really interesting, and I think that it's telling as to why they got Fraser, and kind of like shows where Fraser's talents lie. He's able to find that balance between, the epic blockbuster of Star Wars and the gritty, reality of a war movie, of apocalypse. Well, not apocalypse now, but a war movie.
Sure.
And I think that really, really works, and I can't wait to see what it looks like in Rogue One.
You made a good point, John, about the darkness where you see those two helicopters and it strikes you. I remember sitting in the cinema thinking, oh, have they left the 3D filter or something on? It seems a bit unnaturally dark. And it's one of those things that I think it captures really well, that if you're in a desert, we always have this idea where, you know, the moon is always out and it's shining down on things, but it feels at times where maybe that moon just isn't shining and everything seems quite soft, that you walk in a kind of desert and everything doesn't kind of have, or is that kind of defined edges that you would expect from the moon. And sometimes it's just naturally a soft place to kind of just walk through those deserts, those kind of woodland areas that, you know, I'm kind of lucky to live in that kind of area. The woodland aspect, that is. And I think that is a really good representation of what it is like to be in that kind of darkness sometimes. It's darkness, it's still, it's not everything is always illuminated by the moon. And I think that was a great representation. It would have been so easy to put the volume up just a few bits, but they kept it to that realistic look that they have running through this entire film.
Now, you know, Dan Mindell got justifiable praise for his work on The Force Awakens, but to speak to, and you know, I'm paraphrasing here, to speak to a point that I think Mike and I have discussed, like, he's a cinematographer known for adapting to the director's style. And I guess, you know, any cinematographer that's going to work nicely with a director, that's going to be true. And we could have fun stories about how Gil Taylor and George Lucas wanted to kill each other during the original Star Wars. And, you know, what fun stories those would be. But in terms of that, Mindell got great praise for, you know, creating a look and feel that was very much Abrams. Do you think that there's any sort of thread that, you know, this, in a sense, is Fraser is going to wind up getting more praise for Rogue One than Edwards will, because everybody knows about the reworking certain parts of the script and Gilroy coming in and everything like that. Do you think that the praise will shift toward Fraser's work at the expense of Edwards?
I don't really think so. I mean, because for one thing, people tend to give praise to directors, right? I mean, that's the old thing that they say, like, if the movie's good, it's because the director's brilliant, and if the movie sucks, it's because the writer's a hack, right? I mean,
okay, good point.
So, I mean, I really do think that Edwards will receive, you know, the bulk of the praise, especially when you look at, you know, his previous work. Like we talked about Godzilla and how that has the same sort of like gritty feel that you know we're talking about with Zero Dark 30, even though it is a different cinematographer, you know. And I mean, you know, Fraser, while obviously this is something that he's good at, you know, having done Zero Dark 30, he does have, you know, range, and I think he is able to adapt to directors' styles. You know, he shot Foxcatcher for
Bennett Miller.
There you go, Bennett Miller, the Moneyball guy, and then he also shot The Gambler for Rupert Wyatt, and both of those movies look fantastic and have their own sort of unique styles as well. So you know, I think that he, you know, a Dan Mindell movie, you know, it has certain trademarks, and a Greig Fraser movie certainly has certain trademarks, but I think that he's also able to adapt his style to what the film and the filmmaker needs. And I think here, you know, Zero Dark 30 and, you know, Rogue One don't seem to be very far away from each other, but neither do, you know, Godzilla and Rogue One. So I think it's kind of like a happy marriage. I think that it's a good partnership for sure.
For me, I think actually the thread is that have you guys ever seen Gareth Edwards' first movie, Monster?
I haven't. I have it on my list of movies to watch.
I have not.
Oh, God, you guys, honestly.
No, I know. That's why we should have our yes.
I think there's an element that like that Monsters was kind of how I first kind of knew of Gareth Edwards, and I think how the kind of, well, a certain part of the kind of, you know, geeks kind of find out about him. I remember there was a lot of hype coming out of kind of Monsters, like it was very much DIY. They did all the effects on their own. They just went out there with cameras, recorded things, and kind of built like the CGI around that. They would go out into kind of I can't remember, was it like South America or something like that. They would go out there, film, and then they go, oh, we've got something brilliant here. Let's put in a kind of monster effect there in the background. I mean, it's a brilliant movie, and I was really lucky. I mean, that was a good few years ago now. I was really lucky at the time to be in his presence when he was at like a kind of small film convention event where he was talking about monsters, and then he did like a Q&A afterwards, and he was such a brilliant, articulate guy, and he's one of those people like you spend time in that company and you think, God, this guy's really on the ball. And Godzilla, I think it had its flaws, but I was happy for him. And then when he was announced for Rogue One, I was like, that makes perfect sense. And I think the reason I think Greig Fraser kind of has ended up, especially on Rogue One, is that I think Gareth Edwards and Greig Fraser have a lot in common. When we think of kind of the shooting process for Zero Dark 30, they were out there kind of in the desert. That was why they, like Greig Fraser until then, had always shot on film. They had practiced shooting this with 35 mil, they had some pros and cons to it, but they ultimately felt it wasn't going to be practical to go out into the desert, have all this film stock, maybe run out of film stock, or maybe they would go out there and they would see a beautiful sunset, or they would capture a really nice moonlight or something along those lines, and they wouldn't have the time to set it up and they would lose it. So while they were in Jordan, they made the decision, we're going to go digital. They made the comparison, and I think Greig Fraser wasn't overly enthusiastic perhaps about it, but I think he accepted it was part of the best decision for making this film. And I think that echoes a lot with what I would see in kind of Gareth Edwards making Monsters, that they both went out there into the kind of wilderness, whether it was Jordan, whether it was South America, and they wanted to get a camera where they could capture all this natural beauty, all this visual sights, all these sorts of things that film just wouldn't allow them to do, that they would have to, light film in a certain way. That's not always possible out there in the desert. It's not always possible out there in kind of the rainforests. So I think there's a lot of kind of comparison between Greig Fraser's journey on Zero Dark 30 and Gareth Edwards on Monsters, and I really feel that thread between the two of them is perhaps why I think they're going to be such a really good team together, from their experiences and their understanding of how to use digital and film.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's a good point.
I have so many movies that I have to watch for various podcasts this month that I actually made a list of one movie a day for the entire month, and I can tell you right now, Monsters is December 13th. It's on Amazon Prime, I think. So Monsters is December 13th. That'll be the last movie I watch before seeing Rogue One. So believe me, and I feel ashamed that I have not seen Monsters, but I'm going to get to it.
I'm looking at the back of the Blu-ray just now, and it's got a 4-star review that says E.T. exceptionally terrific. So with a pun like that, you've got to be confident it's going to be a good film.
You can't miss. Now, it's sort of like a final question. Like I'd mentioned how in the Rogue One trailer you see a shot that basically looks like they just transposed something that happened in Zero Dark 30 over into a Star Wars film, standing in front of the giant screen. So obviously, Fraser has managed to, work out or, collaborate with Edwards to have a couple of, trademarks where you can look one-to-one and say, oh yeah, that's a Greig Fraser thing that he did. Are there any other hallmarks you're hoping he brings over? About the color palette, about the saturations, anything like that from Zero Dark 30, or what you saw him do in Zero Dark 30 into Rogue One?
I think I'm almost expecting him to kind of, have the spirit of Zero Dark 30, to take that to kind of the next level. That I think what works really well for Zero Dark 30, this procedural thing, while I would pay good money to watch a procedural Star Wars movie, I'm one of those people, I'd love to see a West Wing version of Star Wars. I think what he's going to do is kind of take Zero Dark 30 and kind of build upon that to what it would be expected in the Star Wars universe. That I think there'll be elements that he will play with that will be very similar to Zero Dark 30. But I think with the Star Wars, you've got so many exciting elements that it's larger than life. And I think that while it works really well for Zero Dark 30, that wouldn't transfer well to Star Wars for the general public. And with so much pressure riding on this movie, and I was at Star Wars Celebration and I got to watch the footage, and like what I get from that is something that's grounded in realism, but it's got all the hallmarks of Star Wars, that kind of the robots, the big battles, everything like that. And I feel that they've really kept a lot of that hidden. So I think that once we've kind of seen this film, we'll see whether they have gone down that Zero Dark 30 path with the style, the cinematography, or whether they've used that as a template and then thrown it out there, given it the Star Wars treatment and made it truly larger than life.
Mike?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I mean, I think like if I'm hoping for something, like you're kind of saying with, like the West Wing of Star Wars and everything like that, I think that I would like to see Fraser take the same approach to Rogue One that he took to Zero Dark 30, where he's like, these are, real events, and I'm going to portray them as realistically as possible, but inside of a, motion picture, you know what I mean? So, I mean, the idea of, sort of like not catering to the Star Wars-ness of Rogue One and just saying like, we're trying to present like a realistic portrayal of something which is, sort of like fantastic in nature. I think that that's a really interesting, aesthetic to go with for this type of content, and I think that it would create a very visceral movie. And I guess that's kind of what I'm hoping for when I see, what it looks like they're doing on Rogue One.
For me, what I'm hoping for, in all honesty, is, and I think we'll get this at least in the, sort of the battle scenes, is for me, each director has left their own sort of stamp on things. I want to see not just an embrace of what Lucas sort of played with a bit in the giant ground battle in Attack of the Clones, with some of the camera movements there, but I think that Fraser and Edwards working together, obviously, and looking at Zero Dark 30, I think that there's a great opportunity to see something with a little bit more of a what I would call a polished handheld feel in a Star Wars film, as opposed, like, even if you go to The Force Awakens, the camera is used in a different way than any previous Star Wars film. He Dutches the camera. He has certain camera movements, very Spielbergian sort of stuff, but in an Abrams fashion. Whereas this, I want to see something where it's not as locked. It doesn't feel as tracked or as controlled. And I think we'll get there. I really do. I mean, based on what I've seen, and I've been on sort of a lockdown, but based on what I've seen, we're going to see an embrace of that, at least in the battle scenes. To do, like you said, Mike, where that it's, this is really happening and I'm just translating it for you onto the screen.
And I think one thing that's going to be really fascinating as well, that I'm the same as you since Star Wars Celebration. I've just gone into total lockdown. A book about it, articles about it, don't care, don't want to read it. Your trailers, your TV spots, don't care. Yeah. But like no one can ignore that. They clearly are pinning that there's going to be a big battle on a beach. It's on the poster. There's been the briefest of clips in the trailer, and I think that's going to be an interesting contrast to Zero Dark 30, where the action all took place in night, under the moon, in a tight confined space. And I'm curious to see how he's going to translate that too, because that beach stuff looks like it's in lunchtime, bright sun, and I'm really curious to see that transition from night to day, how he's going to shoot that, how he's going to light that. And I think it could be very interesting. That I often think some of the best battles in kind of movie history lately have been ones that have been shot at nighttime. The Two Towers, for example, Zero Dark 30, and I'm curious to see a daytime battle, what that's going to look like. And I think that'll be quite a change for Star Wars, and for Fraser himself.
Yeah. No. So, final thoughts on the film. Mike, we'll start with you. Any final thoughts?
I do have a final thought, and this is something which, okay, there's a moment in the movie, right? I love the movie as is, right? And one of the reasons why I love it is because it is super realistic. It doesn't cater to the audience at all. It doesn't try to explain what they're talking about. It just uses, the terminology as they would use this and lets the audience sort of catch up, And then you get to the end and it has this extremely realistic portrayal of, how they killed bin Laden, theoretically. And, I mean, assuming that, because obviously we don't know for sure what happened, but, whatever, assuming that their sources are
It wasn't
accurate.
A tickle fight.
Yeah. So there's a moment in the movie, right, where, Mark Strong goes into the White House and he's trying to convince the White House to do this, to get bin Laden, right? And the White House guy is like, I'm not saying that we're going to do it. but if we were to do it, how would we do it? Come up with some options, right? And then it cuts to an overhead shot of this Air Force base, and it says Area 51, right? Now, I don't know what your reaction to that was, but when I saw that in the theater, my reaction was like, oh my God, alien technology? They used alien technology to take down bin Laden? And then it turns out that's not the case. But can you imagine an alternate version of this movie where everything up to that point is exactly the same, but then when they bring in the SEAL Team 6 and they're like, okay, guys, instead of saying like, here's a helicopter with a really quiet motor, they're like, here's a UFO that crash landed, and we're going to be flying this UFO, and then you guys are going to take these ray guns, and you're going to use those to grab bin Laden. And then they just did that. Tell me that wouldn't be the best movie ever made.
Yeah, you've got my money. I'll crowdfund
Yeah, okay, sure. No, so, you've pitched me on it. That works. That works.
That's my only thought. My only final thought.
Okay, I love that. The only thing I'll say is that I didn't write a review at the time, the first time I saw it, but I did write a one-line review for this over on Letterboxd when I rewatched it. And I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was basically, this is, in fact, a perfect film. This is one of those films where I watch it and I feel like actual perfection was achieved for what they were trying to do. Like, there isn't a single thing where I walk out and I say, oh, that was great. But, except for that one part, but that's okay. I can overlook that. Like, there's nothing in this. And even having seen it before, rewatching it this time, I was still unable to turn it off. I was completely glued to the screen. And that has everything to do with look and feel and editing and direction and acting and everything. It is just a perfect film. Lee, what about you?
Yeah, it's a perfect Christmas film. It's a perfect film in general. I couldn't agree more. I definitely think, while we're playing kind of fantasy role play here, have any of you guys seen Popstar Never Stop, Never Stopping?
No, that's on my list for January.
But I am a big Sandberg fan.
There's a song in it called, it's a bit of a rude title, but it's all about like this relationship this guy ends up in where the woman wants the relationship, the romance to be acted out like SEAL Team 6 coming in. And lyrically, I want to see a mashup video, and I there's barely any part of that song I can quote, where listen to the song. You'll find it on YouTube. Where I'd like to see a mashup of that song with the Zero Dark 30 imagery. It would be brilliant. Like with Zero Dark 30, I think it's one of the most perfect films in the past few years for that type of genre. It's just an incredible testament to the filmmaking, the talent, and as I say, the idea of watching a Star Wars movie where it's that grittiness, where it's completely played for real, and it feels like we've just kind of, whereas we watch Star Wars and we think we're watching these grand epic movies, the idea of watching a Star Wars war movie is totally exciting to this Star Wars fan. And I said 2 years ago, and I don't mean it in a slight on Force Awakens whatsoever, because it's an amazing achievement, I was like, Rogue One will be the better of the two films. I just had a feeling all along, and while I've been in total lockdown for this movie, I'm so isolated from the hype. I'm more calm for this movie than I was by any stretch for The Force Awakens. I'm so confident in this movie, and I'm really excited to Wednesday night, we get it a day before the Americans, to sit down and watch this movie and to finally watch it. Like, I feel like I've been on a journey with this movie. I'll sit there on that night and think that like this was the movie I had to wait like 10 hours on a concrete floor to get a band to go into the press conference at Star Wars Celebration, and it feels like it's the end of this kind of whole Disney thing for me just now. Yeah, there's gonna be other movies, but this one I've been more emotionally invested in terms of a journey. So I'm excited to see what these guys do, and I'm genuinely gonna be so surprised by what happens at this movie. I can't wait. It's gonna be over soon.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to encapsulate it. I think we are, especially after watching Zero Dark 30, genuinely excited to see what they do with this film. And we would also be genuinely excited to hear from anybody in the audience. Reach out to us at thenerdparty.com/contact. Look up Great Shot Kid. Drop us a line. Let us know what you're thinking, what you're hoping for Rogue One, and what you thought of Zero Dark 30. We'd love to hear from you. And so long as you're over there, you can reach out to the Nerd Party over on Twitter at Join Nerd Party. You can speak to any of us, really, anything about any of the shows, and let us know what you're thinking. And so long as you're online, so long as you're on the internet, you can go over to lootcrate.com/nerdparty and go ahead and sign yourself up for a subscription for a really neat service where what they do is they send you a little box of goodies once a month, exclusives, T-shirts, collectibles, drinking glasses, hats, you name it. They throw in a little mishmash of this every single month. You'll get a discount if you go to lootcrate.com/nerdparty, enter the code nerdparty at checkout. You won't regret it. And they have a theme every month. This month's theme is the Revolution, and nothing more revolutionary than trying to overthrow the Galactic Empire and destroy its big toy. So,
guys, I'm right here. I don't think it's very fair to reference to the Wars of Independence like that.
Hey, I gotta say, like Bart Simpson said, the American Revolution was one of the few good wars in the history of humanity. So, with that said, Lee, where can people reach you online?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo. You can find me on the Filibuster podcast, continuing to make the pitch for Zero Dark 30 as the Christmas movie we all need to watch this year. And you can find me on Trek FM talking about Star Trek The Next Generation on Earl Grey.
Mike, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me over on Trek FM producing a show called From There to Here, where we look at every single episode of Star Trek. And you can also find me on a show on Trek FM called Stage 9, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek, along with John Mills.
He's a delightful fellow. I'm over on Stage 9 on Trek FM with Mike. You can also find me here on the Nerd Party Network with Matt Rushing doing Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast, but we look at the nitty-gritty, tiny kernel weird stuff having to do with Star Wars and Star Wars exclusively. And you can find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig Sorrell. And I'm Castle Junkie online. So thank you for joining us. Lee, thank you so much for taking part in this conversation. We greatly appreciate it, and it's been really fun. And join us next time when we're talking about
Rogue One!